Pastor Doug.
Hi Beth, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. We have another rotation coming.
Yes, this time our rotation is called the Garden of Gethsemane. So we're going to be learning about that piece of the Holy Week story where Jesus enters the garden, or enters Gethsemane, and prays and then is arrested. And this can actually be found in 3 of the Gospels. In Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 to 56. In Mark chapter 14, verses 32 to 42. And in Luke chapter 22, verses 31 to 53. And it's touched upon in John.
Yeah, it's the priestly prayer that Jesus prays for his disciples and himself. So.
And for our Sunday school purposes, we're jumping between Mark and Matthew, and they're very similarly aligned.
Similarly similar.
Yeah.
Good. Well, why don't we touch base on what the points, the learning points, and then we'll talk about the story.
Yep.
Yeah.
So our objectives are that kids understand that where to find story in the New Testament. We have the 4 Gospels, which mean good news, and that's where we can find the stories about Jesus' birth, life, death, resurrection, ministry.
Yes.
And they'll be able to locate the story there. And then that they're able to retell the story of Jesus in the garden. Recognize that Jesus struggled with knowing the events that would come next, including his death. And so it wasn't, it was pretty serious, hey, God, prayer time.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about prayer a lot. That's one of our big focuses too.
Yeah.
And then discover that Jesus used prayer to strengthen himself, to accept and follow God's plan, and explore how we can use prayer to follow God's plan for our lives. And then learn that the disciples intended to remain faithful, but were unable to do so.
Yeah.
And just like us, we do our best too, and we fall short.
Yeah. Wonderful lesson points, because they have real practical implications for how we live out our lives and how we try to live out our lives, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but great lesson plan.
So like I said earlier, this is part of the Holy Week series of stories, and so in the different workshops that kids go to, we'll be touching on different parts of Holy Week, which would include the Last Supper, Jesus going into the Garden of Gethsemane and praying in his arrest, and then helping kids understand the power of Easter that follows right after that.
Yeah, it can be some heavy topics, but again, I think they have some real truth to them in reality. So we keep sort of stumbling when we say Garden of Gethsemane, so let's talk a little bit about the story. Beth pointed out to me, actually, that doesn't, the term
Garden of Gethsemane,
it doesn't appear in Scripture.
No.
It's just called Gethsemane, and some of the biblical stories about this time, and in, is it John, I think?
Yeah.
Just says he went with his disciples into a garden.
Yeah. So when you hear the Garden of Gethsemane, it's kind of a contextual
mishmash of several of the accounts.
Yeah.
So, and Gethsemane is at the base of the Mount of Olives.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so you've got Jerusalem on this hill. You go down the hill, cross the Kidron Brook, and then you start up the next hill, which the top of it is the Mount of Olives, and Gethsemane was at the bottom. And Gethsemane was actually means oil press. Oil press. And so it wasn't a garden where vegetables were grown.
Flowers or anything necessarily. Right. Yeah.
It's an olive grove.
Yes.
And so olives were very important, and it
very practical names back then.
Medicine,
Mount of Olives, Gethsemane, olive press. Yeah. Medicine.
So medicine for burning oil, for skin care, for cooking.
One interesting note, I wanted to make sure I gave credit to Anne, what's her last name?
Camp.
She said, one of the kind of neat little images is that the amount of pressure it takes to get the oil out of an olive is kind of reminiscent in the amount of pressure that Jesus felt in going towards knowing that he was going to give up his life. And we see that evident in the prayer that he prays and at the time that he spends leading up to his crucifixion.
Right.
So
let's pick up at the Last Supper. All 12 disciples are there, even Judas.
Even though Jesus knew that Judas would betray him, I think that's one of those aha blessing moments, is that even Judas is blessed at the Last Supper and is included in the Lord's Supper. He's not excluded, even though Jesus knows that Judas is going to betray him. And to me, that gives me great hope to know even someone like Judas, even when I mess up in my lifetime, that Jesus still welcomes us to the table. So, yeah, they're at the Last Supper.
Yep. And then after that, they go to Gethsemane to pray. And in our reading, while Jesus goes to pray often on his own, and this is a place that Jesus has gone before to pray. So it was someplace he was comfortable going. Yeah. And so he takes his disciples there with him, and then takes Peter, James, and John a little farther into the garden with them and says, hey, stay here.
Stay awake. Keep watch.
Keep watch.
Because the hour is coming.
Yeah. And the hour is referring to Jesus' time of trial.
Yeah. And that phrase comes up periodically in Scripture, like the first miracle when Jesus turned water into wine, and Jesus' mom said, hey, help them, they're running out of wine, and Jesus says, my hour is not yet come. But then he ends up, of course, helping out. But that hour is, this time when Jesus will sacrifice himself for all people.
Right. So Jesus goes a little farther in by himself to pray, and his prayer is really so personal to God. He says, Abba, Father, for you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want. Yeah. And Abba is a term like we would say daddy or papa.
Or,
something
very intimate, very much connected. Yeah. I think it's great in that short little prayer, the snippet that we have in Scripture. It shows the utter connection that Jesus has as the Son of God, but it also shows that utter humanness, that just real human. If Jesus was just the Son of God, was this holy Son of God, then why would he sweat it? Literally, sweat blood, or sweat like drops of blood. Why would he sweat it? He knows, because he's divine, 100% divine. But we see that true humanness come through in that, God, if there's a way that this can happen without me going through this agony, this humanizing agony, let it be so. But then again, he says, but not my will, your will be done. Just powerful, just that this Jesus says divine and human at the same time.
He goes back to check on the disciples, and they're asleep. And interestingly, he calls Peter by Simon, which he hasn't been called Simon since he became a disciple.
Well, the name Peter means the rock, and at this point he's not being very rock-like, falling asleep.
Asks them, hey, can't you even stay awake for now? And so they wake up, and he says, this time he asked them to pray too. Yeah. And Jesus goes off and prays again. The disciples fall asleep again, and he comes back. And different accounts have him 2 or 3 times going to pray. And in the end, he comes back and says, "Hey, wake up! For my hour."
Yeah, one of the accounts he says, "Enough. Let's, it's time."
Yeah. So which in Greek meant the bill has been paid.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. Yeah.
So Judas is the betrayer. He comes in, and the chief priests and scribes, they don't come. They send their henchmen to come because they don't want to be associated with
Well, and they are a little bit afraid too, I think. They've seen Jesus do miracles and overturn tables in the,
Very popular.
Yeah, so they don't probably want to be around when it's all going down.
Right.
But they send their henchmen with clubs and swords, and Judas betrays him with a kiss.
Right. And then they go off. Before that, though, Peter and the disciples have told Jesus that they would never desert him even unto death. And that's where, and then they're not able to follow through with that. And that's where our lives come into play too, that we oftentimes fall short of that. We try. But there's that forgiveness at the end. And even in the Easter message, it's a miracle that Jesus is risen from the dead. But I know, like you like to refer to too, that he's not out for revenge or anything.
The bigger miracle to me is not that he came back from the dead, but that he came back from the dead and is not looking for revenge.
Yeah.
I mean, in our society, it would be an eye for an eye, but Jesus, even in his death and resurrection, comes back with, that word of peace.
Forgiveness and love for all.
Yep.
God's love is for all.
Good. Good rotation. What's going to be happening? Are we done with the story? Or I'm cutting you off.
Cut me off.
No.
Yeah. No, we're just going to be talking, we'll work with kids about prayer and how even Jesus felt comfortable really taking his problems to God and talking to God through that too, and how we can do that when we have problems too, but being open to God's will.
Yeah, power of prayer.
Yeah.
Good.
So with kids, one of the things they're going to get to do is watch a video account of Jesus' arrest, the Last Supper through his arrest from the version of Matthew.
Okay.
So that'll be good, called Agony in the Garden.
Okay.
And then in the kitchen workshop, we're going to be focusing on prayer and making prayer pretzels.
Okay.
Talking about the history of pretzels.
Always my favorite station.
Yeah.
The kitchen station.
No, even that kitchen. In the art workshop, we're going to be making dioramas, so kids can visualize how they might picture the garden looking and create that scene that they can take home. And then we're doing a gardening workshop, and kids are going to get to make a terrarium prayer garden that will actually have a little tomb in it and seeds that will grow up, so it becomes an Easter garden.
Oh, wonderful.
With a cross and all kinds of cool things.
Fun, exciting, creative, and educational, all wrapped into one.
Yeah.
Or how many rotations? 3, 4.
4 workshops.
Yeah. Good. Well, it sounds like a lot of fun again, and blessings on your rotation, and we'll see you in church
And Sunday school.